Hi everyone, welcome to the GDC Twitch channel. My name is Bryant Francis. I am the community manager for GDC. I'm a contributing editor at GammaSutra.com. I am here today, being my little astronaut self on this nice, lovely planet. Sort of got myself set up here, kind of on a weird border of the planet between the green and the red and the blue. That's not red. I'm not colorblind, I swear. Anyway, we are here today talking to Brendan from System Era. He is in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. And also joining me is Alex Waro. Alex, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alex. Somehow still an editor at GammaSutra.com, and very pleased to join you today on this special GDC stream. But I'm pretty boring. Brendan, you're our interesting guest. Can you tell everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do at System Era?
Yeah, I'm Brendan Wilson. I'm one of the original co-founders of System Era. I was basically the lead engineer for quite a while, and I still do a bunch of engineering on the game, but I have transitioned to be more of just kind of the studio head. And so I handle a whole lot of things. Basically anything at the studio that needs doing that doesn't fit into anyone else's job description. That's what I'm doing.
Right on. So I think what's interesting about this game is it just launched out of early access last week, I think, right? The 6th.
Yeah.
And you guys have been working on this for years. I think a little over 2, right? You launched in early access in December of 2016. How has it gone for you this first week at 1.0? Like, what's been the reception? How's the studio been working? Like, how's it going?
Yeah, it's been a little more than 2 years since we announced the game, but that was October of 2015, I want to say. And but the game has actually been, like, from conception, the game has been in progress for like 5 years. And I think the reception at 1.0 has been really positive, really encouraging, and it's kind of really been we had to kind of go dark for a few months to really focus on getting the content ready and out, and it's been our most significant update. Like through all of our early access updates, this one, the difference in the game from what we had in October to now has been the most drastic, and so it was really nice to give players that kind of big jump in content.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there are, it hasn't gone entirely smoothly. We've got lots of bugs to fix, and performance to improve, and that's currently our top priority. But it's been very exciting for the team, especially for most of the team who haven't been here since the beginning, because we've grown quite a bit. It's really exciting for them to be able to see a lot of work kind of, finally in players' hands and get the reactions.
Yeah, I was derelict in my duties earlier. I should have pointed out that everyone watching this fantastic stream can go ahead and drop questions for you in chat, and we'll go ahead and relay them. Although we definitely prefer questions about game development or this game in particular. And we already have a couple that are fantastic. One of which from Overboyne is, what is it like to be working on a game that's live and actively responded to? Which is a very broad question, but a good one. So how's it been for you, like working on a game that's sort of been open and in public development for years now?
It's hard. I would say it doubles the challenge, because when you're working on a game that is unannounced or is at least it's just not in players' hands, you can just break everything every day, or if something's not working, just completely throw it out, redesign it overnight. When you're in early access, even though the ostensible point of early access is to bring players into a development process where the game is going to be evolving and changing potentially drastically over time, the reality is that you're just in a live support mode for a live game, and you kind of have to treat it that way. And it's still, being on Xbox, it meant that we had to go through. It was very, very similar to just being a fully released game. We still had the requirement to go through certification stages to get updates out. We had to have all of our ducks in a row in terms of publishing, in terms of store presence. And then, you have a community to manage. And even though you're in early access, people develop their favorite features. It becomes very difficult to make certain changes without disappointing certain people, and so it's and then the speed with which you can work is definitely slowed down, because each and every update has to, keep the game going. You can't break the game to the greatest extent possible. And we had, throughout early access, we had kind of a caveat saying, like, each update has the potential to disrupt your save game. We're not guaranteeing that everything is always fully backwards compatible. We had like a few updates that were pretty big changes, like when we completely changed the base building paradigm at one point. So we had to write some code that would actually kind of give you some credit for the old base that you had. And so that's certainly a big toll on development. I estimate that it took us probably twice as long to make this game that we're playing today as it would have if we were not in early access, and we were not trying to sustain the game through monthly or every 6 weeks and having an update.
Was that something you were sort of aware of as you were doing it, or is that something you've come to realize in hindsight?
A little bit of both. I think we knew that there would be a toll, and it would be a lot of extra work going in, but we didn't quite. I don't think we realized quite how much. Yeah.
So what was the value to you as a team when you were like sort of working through this process? Why did you decide to stick with this sort of open development philosophy, even though it was taking you more time?
The original impetus was really it was the only option or best option we had to maintain control over development, without bringing in a publisher or something like that. And we have a really great community, a very supportive community, and so it's been from that perspective, it's been very nice to learn how to work with our community and learn how to take their feedback. And it's also given us the opportunity to learn. It should be said that when we started, I think when we launched into early access, it was like Systemera was not a company in the traditional sense of a game company, in the sense that we didn't have like an office, we didn't have anything, we didn't have a QA team, we didn't have like a support line. It was practically a bunch of guys, like in a garage band setup kind of thing, and so it's given us the time and by working through early access and putting out a lot of updates, it's given us the process of early access for us on Astroneer has been as much to build Systemera and learn how to be Systemera as it has to build the game.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, it was ages ago, but I remember we did an interview with you guys remotely, and there were 3 or 4 dudes in a conference room, and that was it. That was the whole team. And if I remember right, like most of the team came from sort of big budget productions. They came from I think 343 and such. AAA developers.
All of us,
yeah. I wonder, like, now that you sort of have this shipped, I mean, and there's plenty of people in the chat who are echoing the fact that this is a well-loved and well-received game. How do you feel about your 2 experiences, or those 2 ways of making games, which is sort of like closeted and sort of hidden away from the world for years, versus sort of being open and upfront and sort of just like by the seat of your pants? Do you think you want to go back to sort of a more closeted approach, or is there just a lot of value in the early access open development philosophy?
I don't know, so we certainly don't want to be as closeted as most AAA developers are, where like we were used to working on teams. So I came from myself and 2 of the other founders. We had met each other through working on Halo at Microsoft 343 Industries. Adam, the other co-founder, he worked at Ubisoft, and we had and Riley, who's our 5th and our sound designer. He came from working at EA and Disney. So we all worked at huge companies with hundreds of people at these studios, and at those studios, you as an individual developer have no interaction with the community at all.
Yeah.
And you are told that you are not allowed to say anything, and there are dire consequences if you go and start saying, talking about the game, or even once the game's released, just saying the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And so from that perspective, we definitely don't want to go back to that. And I think the relationship, the kind of interaction that we've developed with our community is something that we cherish, and we want to hold on to that. As far as whether we'll do early access again, it's just a decision about what it's going to be. How are we going to be delivering the best products to to that community in the most efficiently. We don't want. I think early access has a kind of a bad reputation now, and so I don't know if it's a great. I mean, it was developing a bad reputation when we started, as for a lot of games that would start early access and never finish, never come out of it. And you had people would say, "Oh, we gave our money to these guys, and the game is dead. We're never going to see anything for it." But I think it really depends. I think that if we do early access again, we'd like to sort of shorten the cycle and try to present a game when it enters early access that's closer to the finished product. Because I think Astroneer was it needed so much work when we started that and there was so many other games that had gone through early access that were more representative of a finished product, that people were maybe unused to having to go through as much iteration as we did.
Yeah, I want to agree with you, but it feels like the public perception of early access might be changing, and there might be sort of more recognition that it can be a really valuable and useful pipeline for the right team. I think games like Astroneer go a long way towards proving that. But unfortunately, I have let this chat lapse for too long. There's tons of great questions in here. Let me grab one for you. Ross Play Interactive wants to know, how do you handle your workflow? Is it cloud-based or over a network in-house?
Oh yeah, it's a combination. When we started, it was 100% cloud-based because we just didn't have the time or the money to support any kind of in-house server architecture or infrastructure, I should say. Now we have. So when we started, it was we used Amazon EC2 for hosting our Perforce. We use Perforce for source control, and we use Jira for task tracking, which we adopted kind of a little later. That's all. So that was all in the cloud, and we use Slack, of course, like everyone uses Slack nowadays.
Sure.
And that's all cloud-based. And Slack itself is kind of a really useful tool for just storing a huge amount of stuff. Now that once we moved into an office and we had a larger team on site that needed a lot higher bandwidth, the bottleneck between the office and the cloud, especially for source control access, when you're moving quite a large amount of data, moving that for an entire local office through one external internet connection is kind of a big bottleneck. So we moved the Perforce server in-house. So all of our source control, we have in-house servers now for our actual game content. But things like our production software in Slack and file sharing, all that stuff still in the cloud, which enables people to work remotely a lot more easily. So I think working through the cloud is totally the best and easiest thing to do, and you should just keep doing it as long as you can. And for us, it just ultimately became just a technical limitation where it's still, you really, like, if you need 10 people all transferring data over a gigabit connection, your internet connection is it's just not going to hold up.
Yeah, I gotta ask, Bryant, why are you terraforming this beautiful planet?
Because it's there, to quote the mountain climber guy. I'm on a mission to build a car, and to build a car I need more bytes. To build more bytes I need to harvest bytes, which means finding the little doodads out in the forest and taking these big chunks right here and harvesting them at my base. So I was on a quest to do that, and then it turned into a quest of survival when I fell down that hole. So I'm making my way back home now, walking fast, faces flash, and I'm homebound. Yeah, anyway, so I have been struck by, as I play this game, as I'm sure many people have in chat, kind of this, the way that, like, this art style kind of, like, responds elegantly to the shaper tool that you have as a player. I'm curious, Brendan, if we're able to walk through sort of the what makes the code tick on this sort of thing, because I imagine your art team is sitting here trying to create like this beautiful stuff that can work in the procedural aspect, and it was your job when you were working on the code for the team to make sure it worked. So if you're able to give any insight on that, I think our audience might appreciate it.
Yeah, so you're talking about, there's sort of two things that you touched on there. One is how do the artists actually generate the planets, and how do they put their artistic touch into this procedural generation system, and then also how you mentioned that the smooth response to deformation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I was heavily involved in the code for that. So it was Jacob and I who were the first engineers in the project. We worked on there was sort of the terrain system's gone through two major iterations. The system that we shipped early access with back in 2016 was looked quite a bit different than the system that we have now. The system that we have now is way more powerful in terms of the artists getting the look that they want and allowing us to create all the environments that we have now. So the early access game originally was, we could kind of create the surface of a planet, and we could create a layer of caves underneath the surface, but we couldn't do much more than that, not easily. And it was also very prone to, it was hard to update without just kind of like totally breaking people's save games. And so the new system has, the planet is populated with stuff all the way down to the core, and we can create really exotic kind of shapes and biomes. And it's also much easier to update. So we can add and change the algorithms that define the planet landscape without actually breaking people's save games. So the system underneath is all, but both systems share some characteristics. It's a voxel system. So it's, you can think of something like Minecraft. The entire world is made up of a grid of 3D voxels. And then those voxels, each voxel stores certain data. So in our case, it'll be density data that defines whether there's ground there or it's open air. And then so there's a system there's an algorithm that produces the voxel data, and that's kind of like like I said, there was two different approaches we took to this. But we defined the voxel data, and then that voxel data. So like in Minecraft, once you have your voxels, you pretty much have everything. You just render a block where there's a voxel, and the block has typically in a game like Minecraft would have an index to determine like an integer index that determines what type of block that is. In our game, it's a little bit because we don't have blocks, we have kind of a smooth surface. It's a little bit more complicated. The data is a little heavier. Mm-hmm. So each voxel stores the basic algorithm is that each voxel stores a density value. And that density value has a range, and it can be positive or it can be negative. And if it's negative, it means that there's open air in that space. And if it's positive, it means that there's solid ground in that space. And where that crossover happens between positive and negative is where the surface is going to be. And then we run that voxel data through a polygonizing algorithm, and we use one called marching cubes. It's very, very common. It's one of the most common ways to do this kind of polygonization. And that produces the actual geometry surface that you see, and will generate collision for that and so forth. Nice. And then so when you're deforming, you're just modifying the voxel data, where it's not like we don't really have to look at the actual mesh data. We just have to look at the voxel data, apply some transforms to it, so subtracting or adding from that density, and then rerun the polygonization for the chunk. So the ground is divided into chunks at a certain granularity so that we don't have to rebuild the mesh for like the whole planet every time. We just rebuild the small area that you're standing on. Mm-hmm. And that's basically how it works.
But yeah, I'm curious. I mean, in the years of development, there have definitely been stories about this game's unique art style and the way you guys sort of blend procedural content with sort of like a hand-authored touch. I remember reading a lot about the biomes that you set up and tweak so that then you're sort of assured that they will generate an interesting landscape. I'm just curious, you've put so much effort into making this very attractive art style that has I think no textures, right? And it's all voxel based, and it seems very approachable, but also very malleable to your needs as a studio. Were there any like major drawbacks that sort of cropped up during development that sort of made you sort of wish, we wish we'd used textures, or we wish we hadn't used voxels, or we wish this was like a hardcore space game instead of this incredibly adorable, colorful wonderland?
We like to joke that we decided to make the hardest possible game on all dimensions.
Yeah.
Because the wisdom, if you go to GDC and you talk to a lot of developers, especially indie developers, a lot of the advice is like pick kind of one thing that you do that's different, and focus on that, and everything else just do the easy way. And we were like, man, we like in hindsight, we were like, we picked the hard way on everything. And so this has been a very challenging game in a lot of ways. It's been challenging because, I mean, it's procedurally generated, and the challenge there is always how do you give players both like a different experience each time they play, but also one that's not completely uniform to the point where it's just totally boring and drab. And once you've seen one area, you've seen them all.
Totally.
It's because it's so procedural, and because you can deform all the terrain, and a lot of the techniques that AAA games use to make everything run super fast, which involve and those techniques typically involve a lot of offline processing, where if you know what your map is going to look like, and the layout of your level, and all the textures and meshes that are going to go into it, you can do a ton of offline work so that the game is relieved of a lot of computations at runtime. You can do light map baking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You can do offline visibility analysis, which means from every point in the level you'll know what other things are visible, and so you can kind of really efficiently render. We can't do any of that in a procedural game, so it makes it really hard to sometimes to optimize to the extent that we would like to.
Yeah.
And then of course there's other things like we've got these huge environments that are like you're traveling between planets. The planets are spherical, so we can't even rely, like gravity doesn't even happen in one direction, which is surprisingly you think that's relatively straightforward, but like
you'd be surprised.
It's one of those annoying things where like the fact that gravity is typically like -1 on the Y or Z axis is hard coded everywhere, so that becomes a big pain. And we did this all in multiplayer, so
right. Fully co-op. What could go wrong? Yeah, it sounds like a lot more work than I expected. I have so much more to ask, but there are tons of good questions coming out, and I want to get some of them in. Please keep them coming. There's one here from Chunky Spaceman who wants to know, how does System Era deal with programming burnout? Do people rotate what they work on? Do you allow people to work remotely? Or how do you deal with that kind of stress?
Man, burnout. I don't think I've ever experienced programming burnout personally, so I'm curious what that looks like exactly.
Nice.
I think in our case, most of the we've got like 6-7 engineers now on the team, and because of what I just talked about, because the game is this pretty, for a small team, it's a pretty big game, it's a pretty technically complicated game. There's so much to work on, and everybody, like there's more areas of like there's more potential areas of expertise that we could apply than we have people on the team, so you get to kind of rotate around a lot. And there's always things, if you're a person that works on rendering optimization, there's going to be an opportunity to work on gameplay, vice versa. So I try to make sure, and it's kind of one of my jobs in the team is to try to make sure people are satisfied with what they're doing, and so I'm constantly checking in. And so if somebody, we try to make sure that people are working on what they really want to work on. For example, I have one guy on the team who really wanted to work on UI, for which I was like, that's amazing. I want to keep you forever. It's really hard to find programmers who want to work on UI code.
Yeah, sounds like a gem.
But yeah, so, I mean, that's pretty much it. There's just a lot to chew on as an engineer.
Yeah, I can see that. There's a question here from James 5ZH, and it's just like, when you're going to add a bunch of story, which is sort of it's an interesting question, but it sort of does what I want to ask, which is that when I look at the success of Astroneer, and I look at sort of what are similar games in the industry, like it's hard not to look at something like No Man's Sky and to watch the journey that team went on and that game went on. That game seems to be in a really good place, and it seems to have a really robust story and a bunch of other stuff going on there. And I'm so impressed that Astroneer has stayed from the start like a purely co-op sandbox experience. I'm curious, like over the years, like how has the team thought about the idea of trying to add in story? Like, what is any potential value to you, and what is the hassle? Like, how have you gone about thinking about that aspect?
And to quickly just add a kind of a dev clarification, I guess when we ask about story, we should also be asking about what is essentially authored content, because you could totally skip over. You could totally maintain the idea of a emergent narrative or whatever, and still have authored encounters in the game that are more scripted.
True.
That's probably a more broad, better answer, because I will. I could go off on a narrative tangent forever, so I just wanted to rein us in into something that's very, that I think a lot of devs can relate to, the question of authored versus emergent.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Brandon, what about authored content? What's the deal? What's the risks? What are you thinking about?
I mean, that's something that we talk about quite a bit, and I think when we started at the very beginning of the project with just 4 people, it was the decision to go much more procedural was partially because we wanted to create a game that you could put a lot of hours into, but would be tractable for us to actually achieve. So if you want to make a 100-hour game and that's entirely authored content, that's impossible for a 4-person team to do. But you can do it for a game that's more that is more procedural, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a sandbox game. So if you look at a game like FTL, which is made by 2 guys, that's a procedural game that feels like it's narrative. And so, we're like you're wanting to replay it to get a different experience each time, and you're kind of making up that narrative in your head. And that was sort of where we were going with Astroneer in the beginning. Something that I definitely think that we didn't achieve on Astroneer so far, that I would have liked to, was kind of more of what Brian talked about, which was injecting some more of those authored, slightly more scripted experiences within the procedural framework. So things that you could encounter that create a little mini quest for you is something that we're still very much interested in exploring. But they do put a lot more pressure on creating that content. They tend to be expensive to make, and people will burn through them quite quickly. And so you're always having to create more and more of them.
Sure.
But I think that's certainly a direction that the game could take.
Nice. There's a lot of questions here in chat about something called the Big Purple, but I think maybe we shouldn't talk about that. I don't know what that is. Brian, do you know what the Big Purple is?
No.
Okay.
And I apologize for any visual lag folks are saying. It should. We've got a Xbox hooked up to a capture card here, so unfortunately we're a little limited on the tech side. But that should be us. I don't want to throw the poor. Also, I guess it's my tethers. They're saying my tethers are contributing to the. So I'm just generally trying to stay out of like the forest and any like high particle areas. Sorry, guys.
You just seem well tethered. That's.
So when people talk about the Big Purple, they're talking about there are these large structures that you can find on the surface that kind of relate to there is a central quest in the game, so you can beat the game, and those things relate to that.
Well, I'm sorry if we spoiled that for anybody, but it sounds incredible. I kind of want to. I've been meaning to talk to you about just like the general design and UI, and we touched on this a lot, but it's sort of the big striking point of this game. I keep watching Bryant zoom into his backpack, and I love it. I want to watch you do that all day. It's so smart. And that's been there, I think, since the beginning, right, Brendan? Like that was one of the big deals. I remember when this game first started getting some buzz. It was all about like the gifs of these like beautiful sculpted terrains and these very intuitive like UI elements. Has that ever been a hassle? Like, have you ever really regretted committing to making everything so intuitive and like not traditionally menu driven the way most games are?
It has been part of the game since early access, since the start of it, and it certainly has been a hassle. But it's been a good kind of hassle. Like, I mean, it's something that we cherish about the game. We certainly don't regret it. It's very important to the game. But it does mean that what would be a pretty straightforward addition or decision in another game, just to add a UI element, just to add an extra item in the menu, is a much more difficult process in our game for something like the backpack, which is kind of why we used to talk about, hey, like literally, like just hold to this diegetic rule. Diegetic meaning for people who don't know, that means in-world interfaces. We had discussed being very strict about that, so that even like your settings menu would be in-world. But just the idea of having to actually refactor the in-game art for literally every UI change, or that was quite difficult. And it also means that for wherever you have text being displayed, we're localized into 14, 15 different languages, so that if you really can't bake the text, for example, into a mesh without having to actually have different meshes per language. So it's like that becomes almost very difficult to intractable. Yeah. So the game now has kind of a mix of traditional UI for things like the menu front end and some things like those tooltips that you see, but a lot of the just the way that you engage with the world, if you're actually interacting with items in the world, that's all still diegetic, and we really that's something about our game that we love. I think it's something about the game that makes it unique, and it kind of creates for us. It was important because it creates a sense. It heightens the sense of intimacy in your world and connection with it. And we thought that it went along perfectly well with the fact that you could deform all the terrain. It just felt right to us.
Right on. I wonder, let's drill down into that for a second. If other devs wanted to try something similar and try to approach a game with a similar kind of a diegetic design, what specific advice would you give them that you learned during development? Like, were there specific things that were exceedingly difficult? I mean, text was a great example. Or were there examples of places where it was initially very easier than you expected and more valuable? Or what advice would you give after 2 or 3 years of trying to figure out how to do this well?
No text is a big one. So we really don't put any text in any diegetic sort of locations. So even when you bring up your catalog to look at your research tree, that's kind of a traditional UI presented in a diegetic element. So we don't shy away from sort of building a traditional UI screen that we can then render onto a surface in the game. We don't really consider that a cop-out. We're just like, if our rule is that if it's something that the Astroneer would themselves look at through some sort of digital interface, then that's cool. We can present it that way.
Nice.
One sort of technical thing is that scale becomes a really tricky issue. So when you're interacting with things like with your mouse or your gamepad, you need things to be of a scale that makes interacting with them possible and lets you see those things acceptably. And so we play with scale a lot, and people may notice this, that like the resource nugget in the backpack right now is the size it is. It's super tiny. It's not at all the scale that it would be in the world. So if you take that out and put it in the world, it actually scales up. And we play with scale quite a bit, and we don't care to be consistent in that regard. It's just sort of things get scaled up and down as needed to make the interaction more pleasant or just possible.
Yeah, that seems like a necessity. If you're going to start making planets, you got to have a planet that has giant mushroom trees. You got to have like a giant flower planet. You got to have just the weirdest scales you can possibly imagine. There's a super good question here from Shadow Echo. If you got a second, they want to know: can you talk about the challenges of development for both console and PC? They know, for instance, that there were some issues with the UI that were difficult to see on a TV. So let's talk about how did you guys handle trying to split this across multiple platforms and get it ready? And what are the unique challenges of console versus PC players?
They're very. I mean, the main challenge was the interface differences. So making the game as equally playable as possible on both the mouse and keyboard interface, a gamepad interface. It certainly adds to the challenge, especially with the diegetic UI. And so for initially, the Xbox version initially was created after the PC version, and so the very first interface we had was kind of like the best we could do with the gamepad. I think I created the gamepad controls initially, and we made something that felt pretty good for movement, and then a lot of the item interaction was like, well, you hold a button to bring up a cursor, kind of like the Destiny UI style.
Sure.
And then we've since continued to make improvements that make I think the game a lot lot smoother to play with better shortcuts for gamepad. But there's always it's always difficult to, like the control scheme, your ideal control scheme for a mouse and keyboard is always going to look very different than a gamepad. So that's always a challenge. Mm. And then the challenge, one challenge on PCs is that you just have, and this is an age-old thing, is that you just have a hugely, like, just a massive variety of hardware that your game needs to run on. When we launched early access at the very, very beginning, like the first couple of days, we had some issues where people with certain old CPUs just couldn't even start the game because we had kind of inadvertently included certain instructions that were not compatible. They were compatible with, for example, the Xbox, weren't compatible with older CPUs. So the level of QA, burden that you're undertaking to make sure that you're achieving, an acceptable compatibility level is a lot higher than when you're working with PCs. And then you just have this huge range of performance. Like, your performance envelope is so huge. So it might run on my development PC. Our game thread update might be 5 milliseconds. On my PC, which is 3 years old, and but on the Xbox it's 20 milliseconds. So it's just like you really, like, ideally you kind of want to have a person dedicated to each platform you're working on.
Totally.
Yeah,
it's wild to still be talking about that. Like, I feel like that's been a thorn in game developer sides for decades, just trying to make PC games work. But I don't know, you still do it. It's incredible. Talking about PCs and sort of all the different platforms, I gotta ask, how are you feeling about the Epic Store? Are you going to launch over there? Are you going to go to Congregate? There's a lot of opportunities now to get off of Steam when you're looking to sell to PC owners. How are you feeling about that stuff?
Yeah, I'm pretty interested. I mean, I think when I talk about my game dev friends about, like, what's new in the industry, I'm pretty interested in, like, how is the way that people buy their games going to change. I think that's one area, especially on PC, that just kind of hasn't changed for many years. And it's pretty well known by now that Steam is outrageously profitable, to the extent that there's definitely a competitive opening there for somebody to come in with a similar platform and just try to undercut them, which is exactly what Tim Sweeney and Epic are trying to do. Steam just has I think for it's much easier, and, like, you're already seeing this shift starting to happen with the AAA developers. So you're seeing a lot of big games not appearing on Steam.
Yeah.
And because it's, for the big companies that have all of their own infrastructure, they can do that. They can just try to figure out how to distribute the game in the way that maximizes their own revenue. And they can do all their own marketing, and they have all their own multiplayer backend infrastructure. For a smaller developer like us, a lot of the value in Steam is not just the distribution. It's also that it provides a platform that through which people can connect, multiplayer, and and all the other features, and then the storefront, and it's sort of built-in marketing, because you can work with Valve to try to get featured on the store. And so for us, it's as we build out our own capabilities, as we add, we are working on our own server support, and we have a lot more sort of back-end service setup than we did when we launched. And so it's becoming more possible for us to exist on different platforms. The main reason that we've never been on a PC platform aside from Steam is we didn't want to split the player base in terms of multiplayer. Because right now you just connect via your Steam accounts. We don't have, like, our own account system and our own servers. So that'll be, and so to us that's always been the driving factor, is that we don't want to split up the player base. So if we can explore, when we reach the capability to be able to run the game from different distribution platforms, but still have all those players be able to play together, that's something that we're going to take a lot more seriously.
Nice. I have a lot more questions about that, but I feel like it's time to look at chat. Bryant, how you doing in that cave? That looks rough.
No, it's okay. I just forgot that, like, somewhere between the tutorial and me, actually playing the game, I forgot how canisters work, and now I don't have any canisters with which to build a ramp, a canister full of dirt, and I just need to like figure out how to get my way out of here. This is very silly.
You're doing great.
You can always kind of just dig it. You can always kind of just dig a tunnel upwards.
Yeah, that's what.
See where that goes.
There is a good question in here. We may have touched on it, but I want to make sure we get it just in case. Overboyan asked, "Are there any sacrifices you made to get the game working on controllers?"
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
Well,
I don't think we made sacrifices. I mean, we've never so if the question is implying did you nerf the mouse and keyboard interface to make it work on controller, I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
I mean, the game is still very much, I think, a mouse friendly interface, and I think the controller players still have a more difficult time in certain kinds of interactions, which is something that we always want to improve. But no, the answer is like we've never. I can't remember a time when we've been like we totally can't do this because of gamepad. I think the only consideration that we always keep in mind when thinking about controls and gamepad is the number of face buttons that are available on a gamepad. So we definitely don't fill the keyboard with like shortcuts. You know, like so some games that are a lot of games really that are exclusively designed for mouse and keyboard will just like use all the buttons, just like use every key on the keyboard.
Yeah, you got. Why not?
We generally don't do that.
That's like a lot of that's forward-thinking restraint, I think. I remember the 90s when every PC game came with a keyboard map to show you what all the buttons did. So like I think it's just sort of wise to try and keep controls as elegant and minimal as possible, especially with a game like this. There's one other question sort of honestly beyond my knowledge, but I think it could get to an interesting answer, which is some people keep asking about something called the true flat. What happened to the true flat? Was there at some point a different system in place where there were true flat landscape options or something? Like, can you shed more light on what true flat was and where it went?
I mean, it was sort of an accident of development too, which was that you can there's a tool in the game, like your deform tool, can enter a flattened mode.
Yeah.
Which I can now demonstrate because I got a canister with dirt in it.
Ooh.
And the flattened mode just basically like takes whatever surface you're mousing over, you can extend that surface in all directions. And the players had discovered that there were certain like very specific angles that were kind of universal, absolute angles in the game space, so they would change relative to the surface of the planet as you moved around it. But certain absolute angles that seemed to get like perfectly flat surfaces where there was absolutely no visible polygon edges inside that surface, and those tended to be on either I mentioned that the game is on a voxel grid, and so either like any surface that was aligned with that cube face or certain divisions, so like sort of 45-degree angles between those faces would produce a surface like that. We certainly didn't, and then so players have noticed that since we released the new game, it's been harder for them to find those angles and those surfaces. We certainly didn't do anything intentional to affect that. As far as I know, the code is basically the same, but it is something, there have been so like the voxel side of the system really totally changed, but the polygonization side is the same algorithm. So there might be some tuning changes that were made that have affected that. So it's something that we'll look into. You can definitely. There was a time in development where I guess like, as developers we were like, oh, it should be fine now, because there was a time in development where the flatten tool, if you weren't on one of these kind of true flat angles, you really couldn't get anything even resembling a perfectly flat surface. It would be like gameplay flat, as in you can kind of walk on it, but it wouldn't look perfectly flat. You'd get like some noise. Mm-hmm. And we during early access last year, we made some improvements to that, so that on almost any angle you get what is I think to an untrained eye would look like a totally flat surface, but I think that the players who are really astute, creative players can, have been pointing out that they are still getting. It isn't the true flat that they consider true flat. So it is something that we're aware of and we'll look at.
It's not the truest true flat, but that sounds pretty true flat to me. I kind of want to know how this game has done such a great job of building and maintaining a community over the years, because I remember when you started, I mean, you got a lot of buzz from those GIFs. It's a very attractive, very giftable game, and at the time there was like really nothing like it. But that was like 2 or 3 years ago now, and yet here we are. You've launched into 1.0, and you seem to be doing quite well. And you've got a great community here in chat. You seem to be good on Twitter and everywhere. So I kind of want to know, even if you weren't directly involved in it, like, what did you learn about what it takes to grow and sustain a community around a game over the course of years of development?
I think treating everyone as much as possible with as much respect as possible is kind of your first and golden rule.
Nice.
The community was built initially from I think the biggest thing was like our hashtag Screenshot Saturday posts, like from like 3 years ago. And yeah, I don't know. I think that we really respect our community, and we made an effort to outreach to them through things like our blog, which kind of brought people into the studio and introduced them to the team as individuals. Hoping to allow people to get to know who we are and like how a day maybe looks inside the studio, which gives people more of a sense of a relationship with us. We also we brought in Joe Tirado, who's our who's like our community manager, and at least that's one of his responsibilities. And so that's a full-time role in the team, and so his job is to make sure that there's always somebody engaging with the community while the rest of us are working, and making sure that he gives us very regular reports of like what people are saying. So when you're on the forums and you're either saying something is great or you're complaining about something, we definitely hear about it. We're not ignoring it, and we get like Joe's fighting for you. He's always there, being like, this is the biggest issue on the community's mind. This is what we need to think about, and we take that stuff very seriously. I think it's helped us a lot that the game. This is a non-violent, non-competitive game, and I think that the type of people in the community reflect that, and they are just really nice people, and I really love this community.
Right on.
Nice.
We're getting to the end of our hour here, so please, anyone, if you have great questions, please drop them in chat. Brian, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there.
I have no questions. I was just saying nice. I think it's always cool when devs. I think it's the most cool thing about that to me is that when devs recognize that the content of their game informs the community they get, and it's cool to hear that. Like, you probably didn't say, "Oh, we're going to make a non-violent game. We'll get a non-violent community, a non-aggressive community." But it's cool that relationship is out there and that understanding. Anyway, I'm going to try and get this smelter up and running.
Do it. There's a good question here from Chunky Spaceman, who wants to know, with this game being procedurally generated, are the purple landmarks totally random, or is there some kind of system, like a grid or a latitude, longitude, that chooses exactly where they spawn?
Oh yeah, that's a good observation. The purple landmarks are not actually. They're one of the few things in the game that are not really procedurally chosen. So their locations are not random. They occur at specific kind of geometric points on the planet. So if you think of the, so there's, I don't know, I won't give too many details so the players aren't given. So I'm not giving everything away, but
Sure.
You can think of the planet as like a D&D dice.
Okay, I'm back on board.
Alex just
the points of that dice.
Are we talking D20, D12, D8? How you feeling?
I didn't want to give that away.
Okay.
I think it's probably common knowledge now, but if you had never played the game, then it's something to discover.
All right. So I got so excited about D20s there for a minute. I lost the actual answer to the question. If you think of it as a D20, then how does it actually know where to put those? Then
like the chambers would be at the points of the dice, the corners.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, someone in chat says it's a polyhedron. That's the word you're looking for. Thank you, Spidoo. Thank you very much. Anyway, I kind of want to know, and I think this question has been going through chat as well, and I sort of held off because it's unfortunately broad. But like, where do you go from here? I mean, this is a solid 1.0 release. It seems like a totally uh, uh, like respectable dev time. Are you gonna like stick with this project for a while? And do you have a thought for how you build out a game like this that is so sort of like it builds itself out in so many ways that it's hard to understand how you would immediately expand upon it. So like, do you intend to stick with this game for a while? Is there new work going on at the studio? Where are you going from here?
Oh yeah, for now we're definitely sticking with Astroneer, and there's a lot of support planned for it, both in terms of improvements and fixes and new content. I think it's super. I mean, it's a sandbox game, so which means it's super easy to just add new things that you can play with. We really look at it as a toy box, and so we just want to give people cool things to do and to play or mess around with.
Nice.
And then beyond that, we certainly don't think that this is the end of Astroneer, and that we'll see more of Astroneer in terms of more significant stuff. Whether that means like major expansions or a new game, don't know yet. Well, at least not ready to talk about it.
Yeah, fair enough. There's a couple other really fun, small questions that I've overlooked here, and so if we got time, I'm going to throw them out. JDLENL still want to know, who came up with the icons for the resources?
The resource icons were made by a super cool artist that we worked with named John K.
I feel like I've heard of John K.
He actually works. If you guys know Fangamer.
Yeah, right.
He does a lot of their stuff as well. So if there's similarities in style there, that's why.
Great choice.
Really quick, I'm going to swing by Chinny D's question. Chinny D would like to say that in an industry where colorblind modes are not a standard, there are a lot of games where I can struggle to tell things apart. Props to the dev team on great labels and icons where a colorblind mode just isn't necessary for me. I also want to apologize to Chinny specifically. I made a rough joke about being colorblind at the start of the stream, and mostly that was me riffing on me stumbling over words, and I did not mean to offend you, Chinny. Sorry about that. Anyway, so good job on the not needing colorblind mode, I guess.
That's one of the advantages of, I guess, the diegetic style is that we can use profile of the objects a lot more to disambiguate them. And that's been pretty important.
That begs the question: what kind of thought, if any, has the team given into accessibility options for this game? I mean, it's an important question, and it feels like every year at GDC there's 3 or 4 panels that are like, hey, I mean, just think about colorblindness and accessibility and that kind of thing. So like, how has that been a factor in Astroneer's development?
Yeah, it's been a factor. So colorblindness is something that we actively thought about. But since we launched, I don't think that we did as good a job as we could have thinking about accessibility more broadly. And since we launched, we did get some feedback about the control layout and where you have to use maybe multiple inputs at a time or hold down buttons being quite difficult for players who may not be fully able-bodied, and that's something that we've taken to heart. And so we're going to try to do a better job to think about that as far as more options in the controls. So that tends to mean wherever you can have an option to change something from a hold to a toggle, things like that go a long way. So we're going to think more about that stuff.
Nice. Boy, we have so much good stuff in this chat. I don't want to ask any questions because this is all fantastic.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for helping do our job for us. I guess you're asking great questions that help us learn more about game development.
Yeah. Actually, I want to talk about sales, because we did talk about that, and I just kind of curious to get your take on it, Brendan. When you started out, you were such a small team, and I can't imagine that your estimates for this game went out this far, but maybe they did. Tell me, how is the reception of this game and the sales of this game so far met with your initial expectations for the project when you first started out?
I mean, when we first started out, we would tell ourselves that we would never expand beyond 10 people. Mm-hmm. And the team is now 21 people in total. And that's just been what we felt we needed to support this game. And so the sale, I mean, and we've had the sales to be able to support that team, at least for now, still surviving. But yeah, it's one of the things that we just blew our minds. When it was the handful of us at the start, I think we were 6 people when we actually pushed the launch button for early access. And I was like, if we sold 40,000 copies, that would have been like enough for us to scrape by, and at least like, it wouldn't have paid back anything that we'd already put in, but we would have at least been able to like put food on the table and continue scraping by that year. So I was like, okay, if we can sell between 40 and 80,000, like that would be nice. And so like, since I think we sold almost 1 million copies in the first year, it was crazy. And I think that put us on the one hand, of course, it's amazing, and it's allowed us to build the company. And on the other hand, we've totally failed at planning for success in that way. And I think maybe a more experienced team would have like looked at the social media response level that we were getting and known like, okay, this game is gonna succeed. And had we known that, like my biggest regret personally is that we didn't kind of prepare for that. We didn't start hiring until after the game had come out into early access. We really kind of were caught on the back foot in terms of the number of players, and the amount of interest, the demand for new updates, which meant that at the beginning we were quite slow kind of getting off the ground, just because we had all of the infrastructure of a company to kind of put together.
Yeah.
So it's been an amazing, all we ever wanted was to come together and build a little company where we could make the kind of games that we wanted to make. It's sort of the cliche story, but we're super grateful that Astroneer actually made that happen for us.
Yeah, it's always great to see it work out. It's a rare occurrence, but it's fantastic. Brian, you got any last minute questions you want to sneak in before we wrap this sucker up?
Nope. I think it's a good time to. Someone says I need to put the damn medium windmill on a platform so I get more power. Okay, yeah, I'll work on that.
Learn to play. No, I'm just kidding.
Learn to play.
You did great.
Yeah. I don't know. I like my little base. It's moving along slow, and I can God, it's just such a peaceful game, and it's just nice to just poke around and like figure things out. Although
lay down tethers, as many tethers as you can.
I just want some aluminum.
Tether everywhere.
Oh boy. Yeah. Streaming is always like kind of like we're here to talk about game dev, but I also have to not suck. Anyway, thank you all in chat for watching. You've been a wonderful crowd. Thank you for your good questions. Brendan, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Some mild plugging that I have to do. For those of you who are game developers yourselves or interested in the art and business of making games, we would encourage you to check out the 2019 Game Developers Conference. It's going on next month, March 18th to the 22nd. You can get registered if you scroll down and click on the button that says register for GDC. There's all kinds of great talks. There's programming talks, narrative talks, community management talks, wherever you want to do in games. It's a really cool place to check all that out. And then, Alex and I also do things with Gamma Sutra, so you can read Gamma Sutra as well for more of these answers to these kinds of questions. We are owned under the same parent company, which is why we're able to do this kind of work. It looks like Joe is dropping, or someone dropped the Discord for Astroneer so I guess that's, and I think all y'all know where to answer those questions. So with that, Brendan, have a good day, I think.
All right, you too, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
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 In space, no one can hear you. Drop a tether. I don't know.